this computer and I'm going to post it on YouTube. All right, so welcome. We are going to go through a very quick walkthrough through the VS Code extension. I'm going to share my screen. And I might just start with extension. Here we go. So this is the project. There is like the release process and everything is documented in the developer documentation. You saw the merge request. If something's missing, it's my fault, and I'm gladly going to edit. And now for the extension. So there is in VS Code, there is a thing called, only this one, VS Code. It's called Extension API, and pretty much gives you control over most of the window in VS Code. Maybe capabilities overview, that would be a good place to look. So you can do theming, you can register commands and key bindings. You can, I'm going to go back to this list, that's the best. You can let users pick something from a multiple choice, or let them input some text. You can show them notification messages. And while I'm talking about the quick input, it's probably the best time to mention that you almost don't use the web technologies as like HTML and CSS to design some user interface. 90% of the extension is just communicating with this API, saying, show this panel here, or in the left tree, it's going to be somewhere maybe here, the tree, extension guides, maybe tree view. You just provide a JavaScript object or an array that just copies this structure, and you say render a node with this label, this description, this icon. You don't actually do you don't control the HTML that and the CSS that the VS Code uses for rendering those things. So the extension, I'm going to show how it looks like. The extension has several parts. Probably the main and most complex part is reviewing merge requests. So we fetch for the current project where you are, we fetch merge requests, and for each we load the discussions, and then we are able to show a div. And if there is some chat, which here there isn't, but maybe, here we go. This merge request is going to have some discussions. It shows the discussions. This is all us saying there is a discussion on this file on line 49. We don't do any rendering. We just tell VS Code that this file has got a comment thread on it. So that's one big part of the extension. Then we are showing current status pipeline. We pretty much look at the branch that you are in and then make a few API requests to check what is the latest pipeline running for that branch. We also look whether there is a merge request open for the branch and whether there is a closing issue. If the merge request closed some issue, it would show in the status bar as well. So that's the main parts of the UI. And then there is heaps of commands. For example, I can go here and I can say, well, URL, and we would have, nope, copy permalink it is. I don't, we talked about it, and I don't use the, like with Kai, and I don't use the copy link. I think it has to be like a link, GitLab, copy link to active file. And when you copy it, then in your clipboard, you've got the link to that very file. But I don't use it because I like permalink, and our extension doesn't provide it. So I most of the times use the Git lens for this particular case. But we would have open active project, open project, yeah, open compile, and heaps of other commands that to be honest, I don't use them that often. I use mainly the UI interface for reviewing merge requests. It's really nice, but the commands, most of them, except for snippet commands are pretty nice. I can say create snippet, and I'll just say private snippet from selection, and then it opens the new snippet with what I copied. So I like snippets. I like pasting them, and there is a feature that we have also. If you have a div, like let's say I say this is not going to be issues, but it's going to be things, and I would do create patch, create snippet patch, things, private because it's in the main project. It's just going to show what you can apply to apply this change in your local environment. I use that often when I'm doing some larger multi-file suggestion on merge requests. So you've got commands like this, you have the UI, and that's pretty much the extension user interface in a nutshell. I'm sure that I forgot something. And so now if we have a look at the code, the main entry file for the code is going to be the extension. Yes, and probably even more than that, it will be the package.json where you define that this file is the entry point, wherever that is. Engines, extension, here we go. And it's in out because we use ES build to compile everything into one big file that then we package and distribute. So we start with the extension. This is the source for it is in extension TS. And there is one method that's called activate somewhere. Here we go. And so this is where there are singletons, a lot of singletons in the app that are, it's like services that are responsible for different parts like authentication or caching merge request data, and we are initializing them all here in the activate method. This is the only place in the whole extension where we get directly from VS Code. VS Code injects this context. The context is important. We use it for storing anything that's persistent, and it's not settings. Like settings. By settings, I mean the settings JSON file where you define some settings for the extension. But everything that's not there, for example, what do we store there? We store their information, like mainly accounts. That's the main thing that we store in the context. There is a global state, which is backed by an SQLite database, and that's where we store most of the persistent data. And we store there the accounts. And for example, if we show some pop-up that we want the user to see only once, we would, and they say, don't ever show me this pop-up again, we would store it in the global state. And we can't get this anywhere else. It gets only injected in the activate method, which is different from most of the remainder of the VS Code extension API, where you can just access it through this VS Code object or namespace, and you can access it like create output channel like this from wherever in any file you can access the global VS Code object. And so we pass this context into a few places where we, for example, if you have multiple projects for one Git repository, let's say here the case is I might have, now I don't have any, but if I'll go into the project and I say git remote at, but it's going to be this project, but at security GitLab VS Code extension. Remote already exists. No, it doesn't. I said origin, sorry. Here we go. Now, when I refresh this, it should get confused and tell me that there is multiple projects, because now that my local repository is backed by two remote projects. One is the normal VS Code extension project, and one is the security. And if I'll say that I want to pick one, and I'll pick the main project, not the security, that's with the project selected project store. That's why it needs context. It needs context because in that SQL-like database, it stores that we picked this particular project. That's not something that you want to have in your settings. We used to have it in the project settings, but the problem with that is that part of the project is the repository, and the repository is identified by absolute path on your machine, and that's not something that goes well with committing it into CI, which is committing it into the Git repository, which is often what happens with the settings JSON. People often, because you have the settings JSON, you have the settings, and then you have the workspace settings. And where we were writing something into the settings, it was always workspace settings. So this information about the selected project doesn't lend itself well to store it into this this file, and instead we are storing it into something that's more runtime, and it's just specific for each VS Code installation. Like I have, this is Insider's VS Code, and I have another, the normal VS Code, and they don't share this global object. Any questions so far? I know I'm talking really quickly and not that well structured, but let me know if there is anything that wasn't clear and you would like to clarify it now.
I have a question. Are we going through the process of like developing and testing it in a local environment, or we are just going through the code base and that's it?
I hope that I'll manage to do both. Like I wanted to first give you an overview of how it starts, and then I might go into running the extension maybe in 10 minutes.
Okay, I just my only concern with local development is that when you actually launch an extension in a separate VS Code window, my past experience was that if I made any changes, I had to rerun the whole VS Code app and basically restore to the state where I was. Yeah. And I was wondering if there is a better process to that.
Okay. Let's give me, I probably just will have enough time to walk you, like when I'm doing code walkthrough, I'm just going to finish roughly what the activate method does, because that's the most important one. And then we can go and I'll show you how the local development works. I just, I probably should have mentioned the goal of this session as well. It's a like introduction. We talked about it with Andre, that you both would eventually be maintainers of the project. So I'm not the only one. And so the development is important, especially for you now, Stanislav, because you have 2 issues this milestone for VS Code. So I'm going to try to get to it as well. But also I wanted to give you an overview if, for example, merge requests comes your way and it touches something, to have a rough idea. Like, for example, this is a good, like, it's something that's relatively new, and I wanted to give you also the historical context for it. But okay, but that's a good question. I'll definitely get to it, because that's probably the piece of information that interests you, Stanislav, the most at the moment. So with the initialization, we have, you pretty much, it's roughly when you know the paths that I just mentioned, when you see that there is some CI completion. Okay, that's when you are editing a GitLab CI YAML file, we autocomplete the variable names. For example, CI YAML. If I go here and I would want to say, not in only, but anyway, I want to just say CI jobs token. I can just go there and have a look also what it, I think that we had a helpful text here saying what it does. All right, I'm not going to have enough time to go through all of these actually. So why not go to running it locally? So one thing that's probably that's a little bit strange when you are running the project locally is that you can't open the same project that you have already open in one of the main VS Code windows. Like let's say I would have opened this extension, and here I would open another, and I would open GitLab. And if I open it in VS Code, that means that when I debug a new extension window, like when I run the VS Code, when I'm debugging this extension, I can't open the GitLab project anymore. So for example, if I want to test something, if I'm debugging the extension and I want to do it on this project because some particular setup that I need, like a merge request comment or something, is on this project, what I did, I cloned this project into a separate folder, another one that I open. But most of the times when I run the extension, and we have a launch configuration. Everything that you see here in this dropdown, you can debug unit tests, integration tests or run the extension. It's here in the .vs code launch JSON file. That's where the config is. For example, here when we are on the extension, we say we are going to disable all other extensions. So when we observe some bug, we know that it's not thanks to interference from other extension, but it's really from other extensions, but it's really our extension. Okay, and the node environment development that's used for the web view. Actually, Stanislav, that's just the last thing I'm going to mention also, because you might be interested in it. We've got, when I'm opening the merge requests here, or for example, this one, we have this overview. And as I was mentioning that we are not styling or using any HTML, this is the only exception to that rule. This is a browser window that we open within the VS Code, and it's got the full, like you can put whatever JavaScript in there, render whatever HTML, and it's got still a way of communicating through messages with the rest of the VS Code. So while I was mentioning it here, the node environment is used for WebView because we have a different way how we initialize that WebView, because it's a view app based on whether it's in development or whether it's in production mode. Okay, so let's run the extension.
I got to this point on the setup, so yay.
Nice. Nice. If it runs, that's
yeah, it did run. So yeah.
I already have some breakpoint here.
Oh, that's nice. You inadvertently showed a very nice thing, how to do a breakpoint.
Yeah, that was my plan all along. So let's say that we have here this pipeline pill, and there is, I'm just now answering the question about refreshing the development environment. So I think that when we, in that launch, just wonder, here we go, default build task, that's the one. So the default build task, that's going to be in the same folder, but tasks. And the default is default true is ES-build watch. And there is an extension that you need to install for this to work. It's because when you run a task, VS Code is trying to listen on the output, on the standard output on a console. It tries to parse it. For example, when you have TypeScript, it knows, maybe it's not the best example, but it knows maybe ESLint is better. Well, it can parse whatever problems come up out of the ESLint. It parses them using some VS Code functionality into the problems. And it can't do it. It can do it to TypeScript. It can do it to ESLint, but it can't do it to ES-build by default. And that's why here in the recommended extensions, where would it be? Just extensions. There is this ES-build problem matches that listens on the output of ES-build and puts it into problems if the ES-build fails on something. Without it, it wouldn't know how to interpret the output. So that was that, but I wanted to talk about this Npm Watch Compile and what it does when you run the run extension or debug extension task. It triggers this Npm Watch Compile, which runs the ES build in a watch mode, and any change you made, it instantly recompiles it. But VS Code doesn't instantly take it into account as we are used to from web development. But you can press Command R, and that very quickly, instead of just killing the whole thing and reloading it, that just reloads the extension. And that works well. And I want to just show you, for example, if I go here, there should be something like pipeline item model. Here, there is probably hard-coded pipeline. So if I'll change it to pipeline 111 and save it and refresh it here, I would expect that here I'll see pipeline 111 when it finishes loading. So that's the fastest that it can go. With the, I am not 100% sure how the web view works. I think that the web view is able to do it at the reloading instantly, as we are used to from browser, but we don't do much work in web view. So most of the time when I'm debugging something or implementing something, this is the fastest feedback I can get. And I'm at time. If you've got the remaining 5 minutes, I'm happy to keep babbling about the extension.
I'm just trying to mimic you. Just trying to do the change you were just doing and everything. But yeah, that command R is definitely helpful to understand.
Do we have some time to cover tests? Like, what's your process when you're testing stuff?
Yeah, that's the remaining 4 minutes we've got. And I don't have a hard stop, so like if you want to spend more time, I'm keen. So we've got 2 tests. There is a testing strategy. There we go. Just hide this. And the testing, how does it look like? So VS Code provides this VS Code test. I don't know if I mentioned it somewhere. This. I'm looking for a particular name of an NPM package. I can't find it. It's VS Code-test. And so they provide you a way of writing, I guess the closest thing we can get to end-to-end tests in VS Code. You use their package, and thanks to that, you actually, in CI and locally as well, you download some binary of VS Code, like a full installation. You run it with your extension, and then there are methods that can exercise the extension as it runs in a real environment. You can open editor files, you can edit them, you can do anything that you could do in a normal VS Code, but you are not clicking through the interface. How you control it is through the where do I have it here? You control it through the extension API. I'm trying to language extensions, no references, here we go. So for example, I might go and show you, so you have only these methods that the extension uses to interact with VS Code. That's what the tests use to interact with VS Code. For example, open a new editor window and type in some text. The extension can do it through this interface and the tests as well. So I'm going to show you, maybe I'll find some. We have this folder for integration tests, and we write them all in JavaScript. And the reason for it is that we already decided to have a TypeScript definition for tests in the unit tests, which are written in Jest. And so they were the TypeScript type definitions for testing, like it and describe and expect and whatnot, were fighting each other for the unit tests and the integration tests. Now, when I'm talking about it, I think there might be a way, because we were doing that recently for the Web IDE, how to somehow say ignore this test definition for this subfolder, but I wasn't able to make it work back in a day when I was designing the test structure. So all the tests are in JavaScript, and it's not that much of an issue because the VS Code extension API that we are using for like poking it onto the VS Code and extension, it's very stable. So it very rarely happens that like we would have to refactor something into these tests. They are kind of write them and forget them, as long as you are not changing the underlying functionality from the feature perspective. What would be a good test? Let's say maybe some snippet, insert snippet test. Just close this and snippet test. So what we are using here is called mocked service worker. That's what we use for mocking the API responses. There was a decision of mine to not exercise the real of a GitLab API just for the stability of the tests and for the contributor experience. If we would have to set up a token to communicate with GitLab, every contributor would have to do the same if they want to run the test locally. So there are just recorded fixtures, which there is no fancy recording where I just made an API request and I copied here what the API request returned. And we are setting them up here. We are saying, if somebody sends this query, GraphQL query, you return, and this is the ID that you're asking for, you return this response. So we set up the test like this, and then we have some helper method saying, simulate that user quick pick choice, like choose a first option, and then expect that, and then execute. Right, sorry. So beforehand, we set up the mocks saying, anytime something tries to show a quick pick, we instantly return the first option they offered. When they were saying, let user quick pick out of these 10 options, we always return the first. Then we run the command, and then we check that the active editor document text is snippet text. So these are integration tests. This is probably as simple as it gets for the integration test. And then with unit testing, so we are trying to write, or I was trying to write this kind of tests when I saw that it's going to be relatively easy, like that the setup is not setting up 20 endpoints and then having a long code. And when I was trying to write this only for happy path scenario. So when I had a feature, there would be like 2 tests like this for it. They pretty much tested all the parts of the feature, or the code that backs it up is hooked up together correctly, but they are also really hard to debug these tests. They usually, you have very, like for this test, you would get the test that you were expecting there, it's not there. And then you go and you pretty much have to debug this test to find out at what point it fails. You don't get a good message in terms of like, this is where it breaks on this line.
How do you actually debug this test? Is there something like we have the stuff for feature tests in Ruby? Like we launch a headless browser, but we actually can launch a headful browser that we can interact with. Is there something like that for the VS Code?
Mm-hmm. Yes, not headless browser. Like for example, just to answer in that direction, the VS Code project itself has got a headless browser testing where they are actually testing how they render the UI. But we are not doing that. We are using, you can pretty much imagine the test being another extension. So you get loaded our extension and the test extension, and the text extension is poking on the, so it's all like a runtime and a code. It's never you're looking at UI elements or anything like that. And you can debug it in a way that you just put a breakpoint here and you say integration tests. I don't have a way of running only one. Maybe if I put here some switch on the ID, it's Mocha tests, maybe it would run only one, but otherwise, ooh, what happened? will reused. Yes, that's a great point. All right, so I should see an error message here somewhere saying where it would be output terminal npm watch. No, it would be debug console. Here we go. Error. Your test workspace is not properly set up, and the reason for that is because we've got we need to have a folder with a Git repository for the end-to-end or the integration tests to work. And there is a task for it. You can either run command run task, or there is a command shortcut for it with Shift Command T. And there is a npm create test workspace task. When you run it, it creates somewhere in your temp folder on your system. It creates a test repository, and it mentions it in the integration test here. Don't commit this line. I didn't figure out a better way how to do it in non-versioned code, so it just replaces some placeholder here with the real project that exists on this path. And now when I run the integration tests, it should stop at the breakpoint that I put in that snippet test, and then you can just step through the code the same way as you would through any other debugging session. So that's the integration tests, and the unit tests are a little bit simpler. They are just test files living next to the production files, importing them the normal way how we are used to. But there is one gotcha. Every time the test wants to use, like, I don't know whether current branch refresher uses VS Code. It does. I'll have a look what it uses it on the change window state. Anything else? State focused. Okay. Anytime you use this VS Code, that's not something that we would have as an npm module. That's an object that gets injected into the extension or into the runtime by VS Code. You don't have access to it in like a node script, which the jest pretty much is. So we can't access that object, and we have to mock everything that's there. And we would find that in mock, I think, yeah, mocks, source mocks VS Code. And pretty much everything from the VS Code extension API that we are interested in is mocked here. Otherwise, the unit tests wouldn't work. So that's probably the only gotcha of the unit tests. If you, for example, want to run a command, you are interacting with this mock. Or if you want to check that the execute command has been run, files to include. It's just a jest mock, and we are resetting them here. I wonder whether we have anything. No. So that's it. We are interacting with everything on the VS Code as just mocks in the unit tests. How does that sound? We are 7 minutes over, and I have to say I'm a little bit like walked through it out. It was a lot.
It's really nice, Tomasz. Really nice. Do you have any questions, Stanislav? Not at this moment. Probably later. You don't have the audio.
Sorry, my window is sharing the screen.
It's so funny. You were like, come on. Yeah, we understand.
No, I don't have any questions. I just like that everything's so already like simple out of the box. Just run some commands and it just works. And I love it. And also love it that you can actually like see the VS Code window when you run integration tests. That's really nice.
Yeah.
Cool.
Again, there is a gotcha with the open window. Like if you would try to, there is a way to run the integration tests from command line as well. You can run. There is a script in the package.json. Where are the scripts? Somewhere at the end. Here, there is going to be integration test integration. This most likely will fail because the test when it starts to spin up a new VS Code, from the OS perspective, it's like it's already open some VS Code, but it tries to open another VS Code app, and that clashes and it doesn't work. So as long as you have VS Code open, you have to run the debugging or running integration tests through here. If you want to try the command line version, you have to close all your VS Codes. That's the gotcha that wouldn't work out of the box.
Okay.
All right. Well, I'm going to post this on YouTube, and where you can have a look through it and skim through it if there is anything that you would like to revisit. And I'm open to any another sessions or questions. Hit me up if you need to.
Yeah, Stanislav, as you pick up the work, if you have any questions, let's try through Slack and everything, and use the Slack channel so that we can both learn. Tag me if you want, so we can both look at it. And if you have any work, send it to review for me first, and then I'll send it to Tomasz, I guess.
Yeah.
Sounds good?
On that note, Stanislav, like if you have a look through the issue that you are planning on to work on, and you have some plan of how you're gonna implement it, if you leave on the issue like a 5-step bullet point list of what you are planning to do, and ping me on it, I can review it and maybe like save you some time that you might spend in some dead end if you would be interested in doing it.
Yeah. Thanks. And by the way, thanks for the great introduction.
Thanks.
Ito. Thanks. Have a good day.
You too.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.